You reap what you sow. Excuse me. Obviously, there is a picture of the President-elect Donald Trump together with the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. And these two gentlemen, after January the 20th, are going to get together on a budget that is going to be very interesting. As most of you are aware, Republicans love fiscal responsibility. And with the Democrats being in the minority in both the House and the Senate, the Republicans pretty much can ride roughshod over the new budget once it is proposed. Now, I say that because the Republicans more than likely are going to propose massive budget cuts in social programs. With that being said, we need to take a look at the 10 largest, actually not even the 10 largest, but the 10 states that rely most on government aid. If you're not aware of it, number one is Mississippi, which basically relied on the federal government for approximately 42% of its budget. Following Mississippi is Louisiana, which relied on the federal government for 41.9% of its budget. Next is Tennessee, 39.5% of its budget. South Dakota, 39% of its budget. Missouri, 38.2% of its budget. Montana, 37.4% of its budget. Georgia, 37.3% of its budget. New Mexico, 36.6% of its budget. Alabama, 36.1% of its budget. And Maine, 35.3% of its budget. Now, in case you are not aware of it, 8 of those 10 states are Republican-controlled states. The only 2 that are not Republican-controlled are New Mexico at number 8 and Maine at number 10. When I say rely on the federal government for its budget, I mean that they receive more money from the federal government than they send out to the federal government, i.e., these 10 states are massive suckers of the government tit. So, if the government in its budget decides that it is going to cut back on the monies that are sent out to the states, these 10 are going to be the ones that are going to be hardest hit. And again, 8 of the 10 are Republican-controlled budgets. These are people who voted for primarily Donald Trump and for Republican state senators and the majority House of Representative members. All right, if you think that's not that big of a deal, let's talk about food stamps. There's been this big brouhaha about fraud, etc., and how the food stamp program is out of control, etc., etc., etc. That is not the case. Okay. Basically, one of the highest states that utilize food stamps. Well, you know what? Let me roll back. There are approximately 46.5 million individuals who receive food stamps. That's about 22.7 million households. And they receive on average about $123.74 each, or $257 per household per month. Now, in order to be eligible for food stamps, you can't be making more than 100% of the poverty level, which is somewhere around $15,000 a year. You can't be making more than that in order to be eligible for food stamps on an individual basis. Now, if you have a family of one, obviously 2, 3, or 4, that number rises up to approximately $31,000 a year for a family of 4 or higher. And you can't have, you know, a bunch of money sitting in a bank account somewhere, because they count all of your assets. Now, the top 7 food stamp recipients by state are Mississippi, where they have approximately 656,000 people that are receiving food stamps, and as a percentage of the population, it's approximately 21%. The second state, and well, let me just give you all the information. The District of Columbia has 142,000 residents, which is approximately 21.6% of its population. The state of New Mexico has 430,000 recipients, or 20.65% of its population. The state of Oregon has 802,000 recipients, or 20.21% of its population. The state of Tennessee has just over 1.3 million people that are receiving food stamps, about 20% of its population. The state of West Virginia has 362,000 people, or about 19.6% of its population that are on food stamps. The state of Louisiana has 877,000 people on food stamps, which is approximately 18.9% of its population. If you were paying attention, you'll note that the majority of the states that I called off are Republican-controlled states. Now, if the food stamp program is cut back in any way, shape, manner, or form, those 7 states and the District of Columbia, 6 states, District of Columbia, are going to more than likely be hit the hardest. Now, overall, the United States has 318 million people as of 2014, of which 46 million, almost 47 million, were food stamp recipients. The 2015 data, for whatever reason, still isn't available. I went looking for it, but I couldn't find it, so I'm using the 14 numbers. Let's go through the states that have the largest populations and the largest number of food stamp recipients. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that California is the largest food stamp recipient. There are almost 39 million people in California, and of that number, 4.3 million are food stamp recipients, which is 11.21%. Now, California is an at-will state, so you have a lot of people that are making minimum wage. Now, remember, this includes farm workers, etc., people working for McDonald's, blah, 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 blah. But even then, California sends out more money to the federal government than it receives back from the federal government. the percentage of participants is only 11.21%. Now, next in line would be New York, which has 19 million, almost 20 million people, and it has 3 million people on food stamps, which is a percentage of 15.8%. So New York and California are, I take that back. New York would be third. Number 2 on the list is Florida, which has 19.9 million people in the state, with 3.5 million people on food stamps, which is 17.73%. New York, as I indicated, is third at 15.82%, 3.1 million people on food stamps. And then it drops down dramatically. But I digress. I missed one. I missed a big one. The one that I missed is Texas. Texas has 26 million people in the state, and 3.9 million people are on food stamps, which is about 14.29%. So if we look at the data, all of these people, Florida, Texas, California, and New York, those states have the highest number of food stamp recipients. And of those states, they are all federal fund positive as far as the government's concerned, meaning that they send out more money to the federal government than they take back. So them obviously being high in the order of food stamp recipients really isn't that bad, because they're paying their way. They're sending out more money to the federal government than is coming back in to the state in the form of various aid programs. Now, let's drop down to a couple of other states. You have Tennessee, which I had mentioned earlier. You have Michigan, which is up at 16.95%, almost 2 million. You have Pennsylvania, which is at 14%, 1.7 million food stamp recipients. Okay, let's get away from the minutia of the numbers. If Paul Ryan has his way and the food stamp program is cut, yeah, there's going to be a lot of angst amongst all those larger states that are receiving money for food stamps. But those particular states, if they choose to, can make up the various shortfalls. Your poorer states, i.e. Mississippi, Alabama, etc., those states are not going to be able to make up those deficits. So you are going to have a lot of hungry people in a bunch of states, and primarily southern states. Now, I want to bring a third item into the picture. Healthcare. As Mr. Trump and the Republicans have screamed to the high heavens about repealing Obamacare, but let's take a look at the amount of uninsured, or the rate of the uninsured among non-elderly people by state. If you look at the picture below, the light blue, which is centered primarily up in the Northeast, into as far west as Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Kentucky, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, you see that less than 7% of the people in those states, that's 15 states and the District of Columbia, less than 7% are uninsured, okay? And again, those are all states that are positive as far as the monies they send out to the federal government versus what is sent back from the federal government. Then you have another 19 states where the uninsured rate is 8 to 11%. Those are the medium blue states. And again, states like Washington, Oregon, California, and the West Coast, spreading across the Midwest from Utah to Missouri, Indiana, Wisconsin, and then up into the East Coast with Virginia, New Jersey, Delaware, New York, etc. But look at the 16 states that have greater than 12% uninsured. Montana, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee. What do all of those states, oh, I'm sorry, I missed one, Alaska. What do all of those states have in common other than Nevada? They are all Republican-controlled states. So in the democratically controlled states, and obviously some of the Republican-controlled states, the percentage of people who are uninsured is a lot less than the Republican-controlled states. Now, what happens if Obamacare or the ACA, for some magical reason, gets repealed? Well, obviously, all of those numbers are going to jump, and they are going to jump dramatically. Now, it's assumed that people knew who and what they were voting for. They knew that in voting for Donald Trump, that he campaigned on repealing Obamacare. They knew that voting for Republicans meant that there would be slashes to social programs. The people that rely the most on social programs are the people from Louisiana all the way into Florida and all the way up to North Carolina. When the pain starts, I don't want to hear any of these people crying about how unfair it is that, one, their food stamp provision is lost, that their health care is gone, okay, that a lot of the social programs that they were used to, utilized, and needed, all of a sudden were slashed or disappeared. These people voted against their own self-interests, and that happens a lot. So folks, just a little information on what's going to happen when the federal government cuts back on the amount of funds that it sends out to the quote-unquote takers, because that's what they are. They are receiving more money from the federal government than is sent out to the federal government. I don't want to hear them crying about the fact that food stamps have either been cut or eliminated from them almost entirely. And I don't want to hear anything about them now having no health care or an inability to obtain health care because they can't afford it.